She thought changing her name would be enough. She thought 3 months of silence, a fake ID, and a dying diner in Brooklyn would keep her invisible. She thought wrong, because the most dangerous man in New York doesn't forget what belongs to him. And when Roman DeLuca walks through that door, every lie she's built shatters with one look. He's not here for apologies. He's here for answers. And when his eyes drop to the curve she's been hiding under baggy uniforms, the truth detonates between them like a bomb. She's carrying his child, and he's never letting her disappear again. If you want to see how far love can survive when wrapped in lies and power, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The fluorescent lights in Sal's diner buzzed like trapped insects, casting a sickly yellow glow over cracked vinyl booths and linoleum that had seen better decades. It was the kind of place where nobody asked questions, where the coffee was always burnt, and where a woman could disappear into the rhythm of refills and small talk without anyone caring who she used to be. Elena Morrison, though that wasn't the name on her name tag, moved through the breakfast rush with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to make herself small. The blue uniform hung loose on her frame, deliberately shapeless, hiding the secret that had become both her burden and her reason to keep breathing. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, no makeup, no jewelry, nothing that would catch the eye or trigger a memory. She was a ghost in plain sight, and she'd gotten good at it. "Refill, hun?" She kept her voice light, her smile automatic, as she topped off the cup of a regular who never looked up from his racing form. 3 months of this. 97 days of counting tips in a basement studio that smelled like mildew and cooking from 6 other apartments. 97 nights of jumping at every siren, every heavy footstep in the hallway, every black car that slowed down outside the diner's streaked windows. The door chimed. Elena didn't look up immediately. She'd trained herself not to react to every customer, not to let paranoia turn her into a target. She finished the pour, grabbed 2 plates of eggs and hash browns from the kitchen window, and wound her way between tables with the muscle memory of routine. But something felt different. The diner had gone quieter. Not silent, the clatter of forks and low conversation continued, but there was a shift in the air, like the moment before lightning strikes, the kind of atmospheric change that raised hackles and made prey animals freeze. She set the plates down at table 4, turned toward the register, and saw him. Roman DeLuca stood just inside the entrance, and the world narrowed to the space between them. He looked exactly as she remembered, and nothing like the man she'd convinced herself she could escape. The tailored charcoal suit probably cost more than she'd made in the past 3 months combined. His dark hair was perfectly cut, showing the first whispers of silver at the temples that only made him more devastating. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with the kind of casual authority that made everyone else in the room instinctively defer. But it was his eyes that stopped her heart. Dark, intelligent, and currently locked on her with the focused intensity of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. The coffee pot slipped in Elena's grip. She caught it before it shattered, but not before hot liquid sloshed over her hand. She barely felt the burn. Run. Every survival instinct screamed at her to move, to bolt for the back exit, to disappear into the Brooklyn morning and keep running until she hit the ocean. But her legs wouldn't obey. She stood frozen, watching as Roman moved toward her with the unhurried confidence of a man who knew his quarry had nowhere to go. "Table for one?" Sal called from behind the register, oblivious to the bomb that had just walked into his establishment. Roman didn't acknowledge him. He walked straight to Elena, stopping close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle that triggered a cascade of memories she'd spent 3 months trying to bury, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Hello, Claire." His voice was deep, controlled, with just enough edge to let her know he'd caught the discrepancy between her real name and the plastic tag pinned to her uniform. "Or should I call you Sarah? Jennifer? How many names have you tried on since you disappeared?" Her mouth went dry. "I don't." The single word cut clean through her attempted denial. "Don't insult both of us by pretending you don't know exactly who I am and why I'm here." Around them, the diner had definitely gone quiet now. Sal was watching nervously from the register. A couple of regulars had stopped eating, sensing drama or danger, or both. Elena felt the weight of their attention like physical pressure. "Can we?" She glanced around, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we not do this here?" Roman smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. You made your choice of venue when you decided to hide in plain sight. We can do this here, we can do this outside, or we can do this somewhere considerably less public. Your call. It wasn't really a choice, and they both knew it. Elena untied her apron with shaking hands, avoided Sal's questioning look, and grabbed her jacket from the hook by the kitchen. Roman's hand settled at the small of her back, not rough, not forcing, but absolutely guiding as he steered her toward the door. The morning air hit her face like a slap. The street was busy with the early commute, people hurrying to subways and bus stops, delivery trucks double parked, and hazard lights blinking. Normal life, continuing all around them while hers imploded. A black SUV sat at the curb, engine running, tinted windows, no plates visible from this angle, the kind of vehicle that screamed money and power and don't ask questions. Elena's survival instincts finally kicked in. She pulled away from Roman's touch, putting several feet between them. I'm not getting in that car. Yes, he said calmly, you are. You can't just... She heard the rising panic in her own voice and forced it down. You can't kidnap me off the street in broad daylight. Roman's expression didn't change. Watch me. He took a step toward her. Elena took two back, her spine hitting the diner's brick wall. Roman stopped, reading her body language with the precision of someone who'd spent years learning to interpret fear and leverage it. Let's try this a different way. He slid his hands into his pockets, the picture of reasonable civility. I've spent the last 13 weeks looking for you. I've burned through more resources, called in more favors, and inconvenienced more people than you can possibly imagine. I found you anyway. You know I would. I'm not finished. Still calm, still controlled, but with steel underneath. You ran without a word. You vanished like you'd never existed. You made me believe... Something flickered across his face, there and gone too quickly to read. You made choices that had consequences. So now we're going to have a conversation. You can have it in my car, in relative comfort and privacy, or you can make this difficult and have it somewhere considerably less pleasant. But either way, Elena, we are having this conversation. The sound of her real name, not the aliases she'd been cycling through, but the name he'd whispered against her skin in moments she'd convinced herself had been real, sent ice down her spine. One conversation, she heard herself say, then you let me go. Roman's smile was sharp enough to cut. Get in the car, and we'll discuss terms. It was a mistake. Every cell in her body knew it was a mistake. But standing on a Brooklyn sidewalk arguing with Roman DeLuca was only going to end one way. And at least in the car, there might be a chance, however slim, of talking her way out of whatever he had planned. She moved toward the SUV. The rear door opened before she reached it. Someone inside, watching, waiting for Roman's signal. Elena climbed in and Roman slid in beside her. The door closed with the heavy, final sound of a vault ceiling. The interior was exactly what she'd expected. Leather seats, tinted privacy glass, and enough space to feel luxurious rather than cramped. A driver sat up front, separated by a partition that was currently raised. She couldn't see his face. The SUV pulled into traffic with the smooth acceleration of expensive engineering. Elena pressed herself against the far door, maintaining as much distance as the seat would allow. Roman watched her with the patience of a man who had all the time in the world and knew she had none. Where are you taking me? She hated how small her voice sounded. Home. I don't have my home, Roman clarified. Where you should have been for the past 3 months instead of rotting in whatever hovel you've been hiding in. The casual dismissal of her carefully constructed life, the studio apartment, the diner job, the fragile sense of safety she'd built from nothing, sparked anger hot enough to burn through fear. I left for a reason. Yes, Roman agreed. You left because you're a coward, who jumps to conclusions instead of asking questions. The words hit like a physical blow. Elena's hands clenched in her lap. I left because I didn't want to end up dead. Dramatic. Am I wrong? She turned to face him fully, anger overriding self-preservation. Am I wrong about what you are? About what you do? About the kind of man who... Who what? Roman leaned forward, invading her space with deliberate intent. Say it, Elena. Finish the accusation you've been building in your head for 3 months. Her breath came faster. The kind of man who kills people who become inconvenient. And you thought you'd become inconvenient. I know I did. Roman's jaw tightened, the first crack in his controlled facade. Based on what evidence? What prompted this sudden revelation that I was planning your murder? Elena's hand moved unconsciously to her stomach, a protective gesture she immediately tried to hide by reaching for her seatbelt. But Roman's eyes tracked the movement with laser focus. His entire demeanor changed. The controlled businessman disappeared, replaced by something raw and infinitely more dangerous. He moved before she could react, his hand catching her wrist, his body shifting to crowd her against the door. Don't. His voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper, but it carried more threat than any shout. Don't you dare lie to me right now. I'm not. His free hand went to her abdomen, pressing gently against the curve she'd been hiding under loose uniforms and oversized jackets. Not hurting, not forcing, just confirming what he'd already guessed. The air went out of the car. Roman's eyes locked on hers, and she watched the calculation happen in real time. The timeline, the timing, the math that couldn't be denied. When he spoke again, his voice had changed completely, still controlled, but with something underneath that sounded almost like wonder and rage fighting for dominance. How far along? Elena tried to pull away. His grip on her wrist tightened, not enough to hurt, but enough to make it clear she wasn't going anywhere. How? Far. Along. 16 weeks. The admission felt like defeat. Roman released her wrist and sat back, but his hand remained on her stomach, possessive and unmistakable. He was processing, reorganizing everything he thought he knew, recalculating every assumption he'd made about why she'd run. You've known since before I left. The silence that followed was louder than screaming. When Roman finally spoke, his voice was eerily calm. You found out you were carrying my child, and your first instinct was to disappear without a trace. My first instinct was to survive. By running from the father of your baby. By running from a man I heard plan a murder. The words exploded out of her. 3 months of fear and desperation and exhaustion compressed into one desperate defense. I heard you on the phone. I heard you tell someone that Marcus was a liability and that liabilities get eliminated. I heard you, Roman. I heard every word. Understanding dawned on his face, followed immediately by something that looked almost like fury. Marcus Reed. Not a question, a statement. Your ex-boyfriend, Marcus Reed. Don't pretend. Was found alive and well in Miami 2 months ago, running a sports betting operation and owing money to half the casino bosses in Florida. Roman's words were clipped, precise, devastating. He was never in danger from me because he was never worth the effort it would take to kill him. He was a 2-bit con artist who tried to use you to get information about my operations. When that didn't work, he disappeared on his own because his debts caught up with him. Elena felt the floor drop out from under her. But you heard part of a conversation and filled in the rest with paranoia. Roman's hand moved from her stomach to her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. Did it ever occur to you to ask me? To trust me enough to hear my side before you vanished? Trust you? The laugh that escaped was half hysterical. You run a criminal empire. You make people disappear for a living. Why would I trust? Because I never lied to you. His thumb brushed across her lower lip, the gesture somehow both tender and possessive. Not once. Not about what I am, not about what I do, not about what you meant to me. You knew exactly who I was from the beginning, Elena. You just convinced yourself you could handle it until the moment you decided you couldn't. The truth in his words cut deeper than any accusation. She had known. From the first night she'd met him at a gallery opening where she'd been working coat check, she'd known Roman DeLuca wasn't a normal businessman. She'd known when he'd started showing up wherever she worked, always polite, always interested, always looking at her like she was the only person in the room who mattered. She'd known when she'd finally said yes to dinner, to drinks, to coming back to his penthouse, where the skyline spread out like a kingdom he owned. She'd known, and she'd fallen anyway. I was scared, she whispered. You should have been scared of running. Roman's voice softened slightly, but the steel underneath remained. Do you have any idea what these past 3 months have been like? What I thought happened to you? You thought I was dead. I thought someone had taken you to get to me. I thought I was going to find your body." His hand moved to the back of her neck, fingers tangling in her ponytail. "I tore this city apart looking for you. I called in every favor, threatened every contact, followed every lead that went nowhere. And all the while you were hiding in a diner in Brooklyn, carrying my child and thinking I was the monster." The raw pain in his voice did something to her carefully constructed defenses. This wasn't the cold, calculated crime boss she'd convinced herself she was fleeing. This was a man who'd spent 3 months in hell, and she'd put him there. "I'm sorry." The words felt inadequate. "Sorry doesn't fix this." Roman released her, sitting back and straightening his suit with the sharp, controlled movements of someone reassembling their armor. "But we're going to." "What does that mean?" "It means you're coming home. It means you're going to be monitored by actual doctors instead of whatever back alley clinic you've been using. It means you're going to eat properly, rest properly, and stop living like a fugitive. You can't just, 'I can,' and 'I am.'" He met her eyes with absolute certainty. "That baby you're carrying is mine, which makes you mine, and I protect what's mine." The possessiveness in his tone should have terrified her. Instead, it triggered something else, a flare of defiance that had been buried under months of fear and survival mode. "I'm not your property." "No," Roman agreed. "You're the mother of my child, which is considerably more important." The SUV slowed, and Elena realized they were pulling into an underground garage. Not just any garage. She recognized the building. Roman's penthouse took up the top 3 floors of one of Manhattan's most exclusive addresses. She'd spent enough nights there to know every corner, every view, every room where they'd... She forced the memories away. "What if I refuse?" Roman's smile was cold. "Then you make this harder on yourself than it needs to be. I'm trying to be reasonable, Elena. I'm trying to give you choices. But understand this, you are not leaving. Not today, not tomorrow, not until we've had every conversation we should have had 3 months ago. So you can cooperate or you can fight, but either way, the outcome is the same." The car stopped. The driver's door opened, closed. Footsteps approached. Roman's expression softened fractionally. "I'm not the villain you've made me out to be, but I'm also not going to apologize for doing whatever it takes to keep you and my child safe, even if that means protecting you from your own fear." The door opened. Roman stepped out, then turned and offered his hand. Elena stared at it, at the choice that wasn't really a choice, at the hand that had touched her with tenderness and threat in equal measure, at the future she'd been running from finally catching up. She took his hand. The penthouse elevator required a key card and a code. Roman's thumb moved over the panel with practiced ease, and the doors closed them into a space that felt more like a luxury hotel than a simple elevator. Mirrors, soft lighting, the subtle hum of expensive machinery carrying them upward. Elena watched their reflection. Roman, composed and powerful in his tailored suit. Herself, rumpled and exhausted in a discount store jacket and cheap sneakers, looking exactly like what she was, someone who'd been surviving instead of living. "When was the last time you had a decent meal?" Roman asked quietly. "I eat." "When was the last time you had something other than diner food and whatever you could afford on a waitress salary?" Elena didn't answer. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse. The space hit her like a wave of memory, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, modern furniture in shades of gray and cream, art that cost more than most people made in a year. Everything exactly as she remembered, and somehow completely foreign now that she was here as a prisoner instead of a guest. A woman appeared from one of the side hallways, late 50s, professionally dressed, with the efficient demeanor of someone used to managing complex households. She took one look at Elena, and her expression shifted to something Elena couldn't quite read. "Mrs. Chen," Roman said, "this is Elena. She'll be staying with us. Please have the guest suite prepared, the one with the eastern exposure." Mrs. Chen's eyes flickered to Elena's stomach with the quick assessment of someone who'd seen everything and was surprised by nothing. "Of course. Would the young lady like something to eat? Some tea?" "Both," Roman answered before Elena could. "And call Dr. Morrison. Tell him I need him here within the hour." "I don't need a doctor," Elena protested. Roman ignored her, nodding to Mrs. Chen, who disappeared back down the hallway. He turned to Elena, and for the first time since he'd walked into the diner, something almost gentle crossed his features. When's the last time you saw a doctor? A real one, not some clinic that takes cash and doesn't ask questions. Elena's silence was answer enough. Roman's jaw tightened. 16 weeks, 4 months without proper prenatal care because you were too scared to risk leaving a paper trail. I was trying to survive. You were trying to disappear, and you nearly succeeded. He moved closer, and this time Elena didn't back away. But survival without care for you or the baby isn't survival. It's slow-motion disaster. So what's this? Elena gestured at the penthouse, at the implicit cage it represented. This is better? This is me making sure you both live through the next 6 months. Roman's hand rose to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone with unexpected tenderness. This is me doing what I should have done before you felt scared enough to run. Making sure you understand that you are protected, not threatened, valued, not expendable. By holding me hostage? By keeping you alive. His eyes held hers. You think you were safe out there? You think whoever convinced you I was going to kill Marcus wouldn't eventually figure out where you were? You think hiding in a diner and living in whatever basement you've been rotting in was a sustainable plan? Elena felt tears prick her eyes and forced them back. I didn't know what else to do. You ask questions. You trust the person who never gave you reason not to. You don't run. Roman's other hand settled on her waist, steadying her. But you did run, so now we're here. And we're going to fix this. How? By starting over. By having the conversations we should have had. By me proving that I'm not the threat you think I am, and by you proving that you're ready to stop being a victim of your own paranoia. Before Elena could respond, Mrs. Chen returned with a tray. Tea, sandwiches cut into precise triangles, fruit that looked too perfect to be from a normal grocery store. She set it on the coffee table and disappeared again with the same quiet efficiency. Eat, Roman instructed. I'm not hungry. Eat anyway. Not a request. Elena moved to the couch and sat, more because her legs were shaking than because she was following orders. Roman settled into the chair across from her, watching as she reluctantly picked up a sandwich. The first bite reminded her how long it had been since she'd had food that wasn't reheated or coming out of a plastic wrapper. She tried to eat slowly, to maintain some dignity, but hunger won out. Roman watched in silence until she'd finished 2 sandwiches and most of the fruit. When she finally sat back, feeling simultaneously better and vulnerable for showing weakness, he spoke. Tell me about the baby. What do you want to know? Everything. When you found out, how you've been managing, what the... He paused, something crossing his face. What the pregnancy has been like. Elena's hand moved to her stomach again, that unconscious protective gesture. I found out 6 days before I left. I'd been feeling off for a couple weeks, so I finally bought a test. 3 of them, actually. All positive. And your first thought was to run. My first thought was panic. She met his eyes. I was in a relationship with a man I knew was dangerous. I just overheard what I thought was a murder plot, and I was pregnant. What was I supposed to think? You were supposed to trust me enough to ask. I was scared. Of me. Of the situation. Of what it meant. Of what would happen if... She broke off, the tears she'd been fighting finally spilling over. I didn't know what to do. Roman was across the space before she could blink, pulling her up and into his arms with a gentleness that contradicted everything she'd convinced herself about who he was. She tried to resist, to maintain some distance, but 3 months of fear and loneliness and carrying this secret alone finally broke through her defenses. She cried against his chest while he held her, one hand stroking her back, the other cradling her head. He didn't speak, didn't offer platitudes, just held her while she fell apart. When the tears finally subsided, Elena pulled back, embarrassed and exhausted. Roman produced a handkerchief from his pocket, actual cloth, monogrammed, the kind of detail that spoke to old money and older manners. I'm sorry, she managed. Don't be. He guided her back to the couch, this time sitting beside her. You've been carrying this alone for too long. The doorbell chimed, a soft, expensive sound. Mrs. Chen appeared to answer it, and moments later a man in his 60s entered, carrying the kind of leather medical bag that belonged in period dramas. Doctor. Morrison, Roman said. Thank you for coming. The doctor's eyes went immediately to Elena, professional assessment evident. Ms. Elena, she supplied. Elena is 16 weeks pregnant, Roman continued. She hasn't had consistent prenatal care. I need a full examination, blood work, anything necessary to ensure both she and the baby are healthy. Dr. Morrison nodded, his expression neutral but kind. Of course, if you'd like to show me where I can examine her. Roman stood, offering Elena his hand. She took it, let him pull her up, and followed him down the hallway to a bedroom she remembered. The guest suite with eastern exposure. The room she'd stayed in the first few times she'd spent the night before she'd started sleeping in Roman's bed. The room was exactly as she remembered. King bed with white linens, sitting area by the windows, attached bathroom in marble and chrome. Neutral, expensive, and somehow impersonal despite its luxury. I'll be right outside, Roman said, surprising her. You're not staying? Something flickered in his eyes. I thought you'd prefer privacy. Elena realized she didn't want to be alone with a strange doctor, even one Roman clearly trusted. You can stay. The examination was thorough and professional. Dr. Morrison asked questions about her symptoms, her diet, her stress levels. He performed an ultrasound with portable equipment that looked like it cost more than Elena had made in the past year. And through it all, Roman stood by the window, watching without interfering. Everything looks good, Dr. Morrison finally announced. The baby is measuring right on schedule. Heart rate is strong. You're definitely dehydrated and underweight, but nothing we can't address with proper nutrition and prenatal vitamins. He wrote out prescriptions, gave Elena a list of foods to focus on, and scheduled a follow-up for 2 weeks out. When he left, Elena sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the ultrasound image he'd left behind. A baby. Her baby. Their baby. Real in a way it hadn't been when she'd been running. Roman sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Boy or girl? Too early to tell. Do you want to know? When it's time? Elena looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since the diner. She saw the exhaustion he hid well, the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself like a man who'd been braced for disaster and had just barely avoided it. Roman, she said quietly, why are you doing this? Because it's mine. That's not because you're mine, he corrected, his hand covering hers on the ultrasound image. Because 3 months ago, I woke up to find you gone and spent the worst 97 days of my life thinking I'd lost you because I don't lose what belongs to me. I'm not property. No, he agreed. You're considerably more dangerous than that. You're the woman I... He stopped, the words catching on something he apparently wasn't ready to say. You're carrying my child. That makes you untouchable, protected. Mine to care for, not mine to control. It doesn't feel like there's a difference. There will be. Roman stood, putting distance between them. But first, you're going to rest. You're going to eat properly. You're going to let Dr. Morrison monitor you and the baby, and we're going to have a lot of conversations about exactly what you thought you heard and why you believe the worst of me. And if I want to leave? His smile was sharp. Then we'll have a different conversation about why that's not an option. But I'm hoping it won't come to that. He left her there, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded too much like a lock engaging. Elena sat in the expensive silence, her hand on her stomach, and wondered if she'd just traded one kind of prison for another. Outside the window, Manhattan glittered with 1,000 lights, beautiful and unreachable and impossible to escape. Elena woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the disorienting sensation of Egyptian cotton sheets against her skin. For 3 blissful seconds, she forgot where she was. Then memory crashed back. The diner, Roman, the penthouse, the doctor, the ultrasound image that proved her secret was no longer hers alone. She sat up too quickly, and nausea rolled through her in waves. Morning sickness had been her constant companion for weeks, but she'd learned to manage it with crackers and ginger tea and sheer force of will. Now, in this too soft bed, in this too beautiful room, her body decided to rebel. She barely made it to the bathroom before her stomach emptied itself. She knelt on a marble tile that probably cost more per square foot than her monthly rent had been, and let her body purge everything she'd eaten the night before. When the heaving finally stopped, she rested her forehead against the cool porcelain and tried to remember how to breathe. A knock on the bedroom door made her freeze. Elena, Roman's voice muffled by wood but unmistakable. She didn't answer, couldn't answer. Her throat burned and humiliation warred with lingering nausea for dominance. The knock came again, more insistent. "I'm coming in." "Don't." But the door was already opening, and then Roman was there, filling the doorway in tailored slacks and a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. He took in the scene, her on the bathroom floor, the evidence in the toilet, her shaking hands, and something shifted in his expression. He moved to the sink without a word, dampened a washcloth with cool water, and knelt beside her. The cloth touched her forehead, her neck, her wrists, and the relief was so immediate she nearly cried. "How long has it been this bad?" he asked quietly. "It's not. Don't lie to me about this." He helped her sit back against the tub, his hands gentle but firm. "How long, Elena?" "Since the beginning. It's normal." "Normal doesn't mean you should suffer through it alone." Roman flushed the toilet, rinsed the washcloth, brought it back to her face. "Dr. Morrison can prescribe something. I don't want drugs in my system." "You want to throw up every morning for the next 6 months instead?" Elena closed her eyes. "It's not every morning. Just most of them." Not a question. Roman studied her face with an intensity that made her want to hide. "You've been doing this alone in some basement apartment, haven't you? No one to hold your hair back, no one to check on you, just you and the bathroom floor." The image he painted was too accurate. Elena had spent more mornings than she could count exactly like this. Alone, sick, terrified, and convinced she'd made a catastrophic mistake by running. But admitting that now felt like surrender. "I managed." Managing isn't the same as thriving. Roman stood, offering his hand. "Can you stand?" She let him pull her up, hating how weak her legs felt, how much she had to lean on his strength. He guided her to the sink, where a new toothbrush sat in its packaging beside expensive toiletries that hadn't been there the night before. "Mrs. Chen stocked the bathroom this morning," Roman explained, reading her expression. "Everything you might need." Elena unwrapped the toothbrush with shaking hands and tried to scrub away the taste of bile. Roman stayed close, but not crowding, a presence in her peripheral vision that should have felt threatening but instead felt oddly steadying. When she finished, he guided her back to the bedroom. The bed had been made, more of Mrs. Chen's efficient work, and a tray sat on the nightstand with dry toast, crackers, ginger tea, and what looked like fresh fruit. "Eat something," Roman instructed, "even if it's just the crackers. You need something in your stomach." "I'll just throw it up again." "Maybe. But you need to try." He waited until she'd settled against the headboard and reluctantly picked up a piece of toast before continuing. "Dr. Morrison is coming back this afternoon. He'll have those prenatal vitamins and something for the nausea." "I told you. And I'm telling you that making yourself suffer isn't noble. It's stubborn." Roman's voice hardened slightly. "You're not in that basement anymore. You don't have to white-knuckle your way through pregnancy complications because you're too proud or too scared to ask for help." Elena took a small bite of toast, more to shut him up than because she thought it would stay down. "This isn't help. This is a cage with better amenities." "Is it?" Roman moved to the windows, looking out over the park with his hands in his pockets. "You have access to the best medical care in the city. You have food that isn't diner leftovers or whatever expired items you could afford. You have a bed that doesn't come with cockroaches and a bathroom that has hot water 24 hours a day instead of whenever the super feels like fixing the boiler." The accuracy of his assessment told Elena exactly how thoroughly he'd investigated her living situation. The studio in Brooklyn with its unreliable heat and persistent pest problem, the landlord who took cash and didn't ask for references, the proximity to the diner that made it convenient but also made her feel trapped in a 5-block radius of survival. "How did you find me?" she asked quietly. Roman turned back to her. "Does it matter?" "Yes." He was silent for a long moment, weighing something. "You used your real social security number to get the apartment. Fake name, but real documentation where it counted, because you needed something binding enough that a landlord would take cash without asking too many questions. Once I knew to look for that pattern, the rest was just time and resources. So the fake name didn't matter at all. The fake name slowed me down by about 3 weeks. Roman's expression was unreadable. You did better than most people trying to disappear, but you're not most people, and I'm not most pursuers. Elena set the toast down, her appetite gone. What happens now? Now you rest, you eat, you let the doctor examine you properly. And tonight, we talk. About what? About everything you think you know and everything you got wrong. Roman moved toward the door. Mrs. Chen will check on you in an hour. If you need anything before then, there's an intercom panel by the bed. Press the red button. And if I want to leave? He paused with his hand on the door frame. Then you'll discover that the elevator requires a code you don't have, the stairwell doors are locked from this side, and my security team has very clear instructions about you not leaving this building. The bluntness should have terrified her. Instead, it just confirmed what she'd already known. She wasn't a guest. She was a prisoner, however well treated. So I'm trapped. You're protected. Roman's eyes met hers. There's a difference, even if you can't see it yet. He left before she could respond, closing the door with that same soft, final click. Elena sat in the expensive silence, her hand moving to her stomach in that unconscious gesture that had become habit. The baby, their baby, moved slightly, a flutter that still felt more like imagination than reality. 16 weeks. 4 months. Halfway to a future she hadn't planned and couldn't control. She picked up the ultrasound image from the nightstand, studying the grainy black and white that supposedly showed a tiny human forming inside her. It looked like abstract art more than a baby, but Dr. Morrison had pointed out the head, the limbs, the rapid heartbeat that proved life. Her baby. Roman's baby. A child who would be born into a world of wealth and danger, protection and control, luxury and violence. Elena set the image down and forced herself to eat another piece of toast. It stayed down this time, a small victory in a war she was losing on all fronts. The morning crawled past. Mrs. Chen appeared with more food, checking Elena's color and asking gentle questions about how she felt. A young woman in medical scrubs came to draw blood, efficient and professional, and clearly used to working for Roman's household. Elena submitted to all of it with the numb compliance of someone who'd learned that resistance only delayed the inevitable. By afternoon, she felt restless enough to explore. The bedroom door wasn't locked. Roman's control apparently didn't extend to making her feel literally imprisoned within the suite. She ventured into the hallway, reacquainting herself with the penthouse's layout. The living room, where Roman had brought her last night. The formal dining room she'd only seen used once, for a dinner party where she'd been introduced to men whose faces she'd later seen in news articles about organized crime investigations. The kitchen where Mrs. Chen ruled with quiet efficiency, currently preparing something that smelled like heaven and made Elena's stomach growl despite the nausea. And Roman's office, door half open, the man himself visible through the gap. Elena should have walked past. Should have returned to her designated space and waited for the evening confrontation he'd promised. But curiosity and defiance and sheer boredom drove her to stop in the doorway. Roman sat behind a massive desk, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in rapid Italian to someone on the other end. His free hand moved over documents spread across the desk surface. Contracts, from what Elena could see, dense with legal language and signatures. The conversation sounded tense. Roman's tone clipped and authoritative in a way that reminded her exactly who and what he was. He looked up, saw her, and held up one finger in a wait gesture. Elena leaned against the doorframe, watching as he concluded the call with what sounded like a very final instruction. "You're supposed to be resting," he said, setting the phone down. "I got bored." "Bored enough to wander into my office uninvited?" The door was open. Elena stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, leather furniture, windows that offered a different view of the city. Art on the walls that she recognized from gallery visits where Roman had asked her opinion like it mattered. "Do you ever actually read these books, or are they just for show?" "I read." Roman leaned back in his chair, watching her explore with that predatory patience she remembered too well. First editions, mostly. Some of them are investments. Some I actually enjoy. Elena pulled a volume from the shelf. Dante's Inferno in the original Italian, leather-bound, and probably worth more than she'd made in 6 months. "Did you read this one?" "Multiple times." Roman's expression shifted to something almost amused. My grandfather insisted I know the classics. He said a man who runs an empire should understand the architecture of hell. How philosophical. Elena replaced the book carefully. Was he also a... She stopped, unsure how to finish the question. Criminal? Roman supplied. Yes, unapologetically. He built what I inherited, and he taught me that power without culture is just thuggery with money. And murder without poetry is just murder? Something like that. Roman stood, moving around the desk to close some of the distance between them. You're trying to provoke me. I'm trying to understand you. Elena met his eyes. 3 months ago, I thought I knew who you were. Then I heard that phone call and realized I didn't know anything. You knew enough to end up in my bed for 6 months. The bluntness made her flinch. I knew the version of you that wanted me to know him. The man who took me to galleries and made me laugh and never raised his voice. I didn't know the man who... She gestured at the office, the symbols of power and control. This man. They're the same person, Elena. Roman stopped just outside her personal space, close enough to touch but not touching. I never lied about what I am. I run legitimate businesses and illegitimate ones. I make decisions that sometimes involve violence. I exist in a world where power is the only currency that matters and weakness gets you killed. You knew all of that. Knowing in theory and confronting it in practice are different things. Agreed. Roman's hand rose to her face, and this time Elena didn't pull away. Which is why tonight we're having the conversation we should have had 3 months ago. The one where you ask me about that phone call, and I tell you exactly what it meant. The one where you decide if you can live with the truth, or if you're going to spend the rest of this pregnancy trying to convince yourself I'm the monster you want me to be. Before Elena could respond, his phone buzzed. Roman glanced at it, and something in his expression hardened. What? Elena asked. We have a visitor. He looked up at her. Someone I need you to meet. I'm not exactly dressed for company. Elena gestured at her borrowed clothes. Yoga pants and a soft sweater that Mrs. Chen had provided that morning. You're fine. Roman's hand moved to the small of her back, guiding her toward the door. This won't take long. They moved through the penthouse to the formal living room. A man stood by the windows, early 40s, expensive suit, dark hair graying at the temples. He turned as they entered, and Elena saw intelligence in his eyes, along with something that looked like assessment. Vincent, Roman said by way of greeting. Elena, this is Vincent Castellano. He handles my legal operations. Vincent extended his hand. Elena shook it, noting the firm grip and the way his eyes tracked to her stomach with the same quick calculation Dr. Morrison had shown. Ms. Elena, Vincent said smoothly, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. Finally? Elena glanced at Roman. I mentioned you were back, Roman said. Vincent has some documents that require your attention. Elena's defenses snapped to full alert. What kind of documents? Vincent produced a folder from his briefcase, setting it on the coffee table. Nothing sinister, I assure you. Just some paperwork regarding medical care, legal protection, and financial security. I'm not signing anything I haven't read. I wouldn't expect you to. Vincent's smile was professionally pleasant. Take all the time you need. Roman wanted you to understand that you and the baby are protected in every legal sense. Medical decisions, inheritance, custody arrangements, everything documented and ironclad. Elena looked at Roman. You're having lawyers draw up custody papers before the baby is even born? I'm making sure that if something happens to me, you and the child are taken care of. Roman's tone was matter of fact. It's not about control. It's about security. Everything with you is about control. Everything with me is about protecting what matters. Roman nodded to Vincent. Leave the documents. Elena will review them when she's ready. Vincent set the folder down and made his exit with the smooth efficiency of someone used to dismissing himself from tense situations. When he was gone, Elena picked up the folder, flipping through pages dense with legal terminology. Custody arrangements in case of Roman's death or incapacitation, medical power of attorney, trust funds, life insurance, pages and pages of what-ifs and protections and money she couldn't even conceptualize. This is insane, she breathed. This is necessary. Roman took the folder from her hands, setting it aside. I live in a dangerous world, Elena. I have enemies who would use you or the baby to get to me. This documentation ensures that even if the worst happens, you're both protected. Protected or owned? There's a difference. Is there? Elena's voice rose. Because from where I'm standing, this looks a lot like you're building a legal fortress around me and the baby, making sure I can't leave even if I want to. You can leave. Roman's voice was dangerously calm. The moment that baby is born healthy and safe, you can walk out of here and never look back. But you won't take my child into a life of instability and fear because you're too stubborn to accept help. So I can leave, but only if I abandon my baby? You can leave, but the baby stays protected. Whether that's with you or without you is your choice. Roman's eyes were hard. I'm not the villain here, Elena. I'm the man trying to make sure my child doesn't grow up the way I did, with a target on their back and no one powerful enough to keep them safe. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Elena had never heard Roman talk about his childhood, about what had made him into the man who controlled an empire with calculated violence and iron will. What happened to you? She asked quietly. Roman's jaw tightened. That's a conversation for tonight. Right now you need to eat lunch, and I need to handle some business. But understand this. Everything I'm doing is to prevent history from repeating itself. He left her standing there with a folder full of legal protections that felt more like shackles and questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. Lunch appeared courtesy of Mrs. Chen, soup and bread and more ginger tea. Elena ate mechanically, her mind turning over everything that had happened since Roman had walked into the diner. Less than 24 hours, and her entire world had shifted from survival mode to something she couldn't quite name. Not imprisonment, not exactly, but not freedom either. Dr. Morrison returned in the afternoon with a pharmacy bag full of vitamins and anti-nausea medication. He performed another examination, asked more questions, and gave Elena information about what to expect in the coming weeks. All very professional, all very thorough, all very much proof that Roman was serious about her health being monitored. You're doing well, considering, Dr. Morrison said as he packed up his equipment, but you need to gain weight. The baby is fine now, but you can't continue at your current nutritional deficit. I'm eating. You're eating enough to survive. You need to eat enough to thrive. He glanced toward the door where Roman had been standing during the examination. I've given Mr. DeLuca some dietary recommendations. Between him and Mrs. Chen, I expect you'll be properly fed. It should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt like one more area of her life being managed by other people. When the doctor left, Elena found herself alone in the suite again. Evening was falling outside the windows, Manhattan transforming into a galaxy of lights. She should have felt trapped. Instead, she felt strangely suspended, caught between the life she'd been living and the future being built around her without her input. A knock on the door broke her reverie. Roman stood in the hallway, changed into dark jeans and a black sweater that made him look simultaneously more casual and more dangerous. Dinner's ready, he said, and after that, we talk. This isn't optional, Elena. His voice was firm but not unkind. You've had questions for 3 months. I'm giving you answers, but you have to be willing to hear them. Elena stood, smoothing her borrowed clothes in a gesture that was more nervous habit than actual attempt to look presentable. And if I don't like what I hear, then at least you'll know the truth instead of living with assumptions. Roman offered his hand. Come on. They ate in the formal dining room, a meal Mrs. Chen had clearly crafted with Elena's dietary needs in mind. Lean protein, vegetables, whole grains, everything designed to build strength without triggering nausea. Roman ate across from her, and the domesticity of it felt surreal. You're staring, Roman said without looking up from his plate. I'm trying to reconcile the man who orders hits with the man who makes sure I have ginger tea. Both are true. Roman met her eyes. I'm capable of violence when necessary and tenderness when warranted. The fact that you've only seen one side doesn't negate the other. Which side am I seeing now? Both. Roman set down his fork. I'm being gentle with you because you're carrying my child and because you're frightened. But make no mistake, if you try to run again, you'll see exactly how ruthless I can be about keeping you here. The honesty should have terrified her. Instead, it felt almost refreshing after months of living with assumptions and fear. They finished eating in silence. Mrs. Chen cleared the dishes, offered tea that Roman accepted, and Elena declined, then disappeared with her usual discretion. Roman stood, offering his hand again. My office. More privacy. Elena followed him through the penthouse, her heart rate picking up with each step. The office felt different at night, darker, more intimate, with only a few lamps casting warm light across leather and wood. Roman gestured to the couch. Elena sat, and he settled beside her, close enough that she could feel his body heat, but not touching. "Ask," he said simply. "The phone call." Elena's voice was steadier than she felt. 3 months ago, you were speaking to someone about Marcus being a liability that needed to be eliminated. I heard you, Roman. I heard every word. You heard part of a conversation and filled in the context with fear. Roman's expression was unreadable. Yes, I said Marcus was a liability. Yes, I said liabilities get eliminated, but I wasn't talking about killing him. Then what? I was talking about eliminating him from your life. Roman's voice was controlled, precise. Marcus Reed was using you to get information about my operations. He was feeding you questions disguised as casual conversation, trying to piece together details he could sell to my competitors. When I realized what he was doing, I had two choices: kill him for industrial espionage, or scare him badly enough that he'd disappear on his own. Elena felt the room tilt. You're lying. I'm not. Roman pulled out his phone, navigating to a folder of images. These are surveillance photos from the 3 months before you left. Marcus meeting with known associates of the Brennan family. Marcus receiving cash payments. Marcus photographing documents in your apartment when you weren't home. The images were damning. Elena stared at a man she'd dated for 6 months before Roman, seeing him in contexts she'd never imagined, meeting with strangers in dark corners, accepting envelopes, rifling through her things. Why didn't you tell me? She whispered. Because I was handling it, and I didn't want you involved. Roman set the phone aside. I confronted him. I gave him a choice: disappear permanently, or I'd make sure everyone he owed money to knew exactly where to find him. He chose Miami and a new identity. Last I checked, he's running a small-time betting operation and staying far away from anything connected to me. So you didn't kill him? I never intended to. Roman's hand found hers. The conversation you overheard was me telling my security chief to make sure Marcus understood the consequences of coming back. Eliminate the liability meant eliminate him as a threat to you, not eliminate him from existence. Elena pulled her hand away, needing the physical space to process. I spent 3 months thinking you were going to kill me for being a witness. You spent 3 months jumping to conclusions instead of asking questions. Roman's voice hardened slightly. I'm not saying I'm not capable of killing, Elena. I absolutely am, but I don't kill the woman He stopped, that same catch she'd heard before. I don't kill people I care about over misunderstandings. Then what do you kill people over? Betrayal. Direct threats to my family or my business. Violations of agreements that can only be settled with blood. Roman's eyes were steady on hers. I'm not going to lie to you about what I am, but I need you to understand that there's a code to what I do. Lines I don't cross. And you were never anywhere near those lines. Elena stood, needing to move, to think, to breathe in a room that suddenly felt too small. You should have told me about Marcus. Probably. Roman didn't move from the couch. But you should have trusted me enough to ask before you disappeared. I was scared. And now? Elena turned to face him. Now I'm terrified for completely different reasons. Such as? Such as realizing I might have been wrong. Such as understanding that I threw away 3 months of my life, and yours. Because I didn't know how to ask a simple question. Such as being forced to accept help from someone I convinced myself was my enemy. Roman stood, crossing to where she stood by the windows. I'm not your enemy, Elena. I never was. But I'm also not going to pretend I'm something I'm not to make you comfortable. I don't want you to pretend. Elena's hand moved to her stomach. I want to know if this baby is going to grow up safe, or if they're going to be a pawn in whatever war you're fighting. Both. The honesty was brutal. They'll be as safe as I can make them, which is safer than 99% of the population. But yes, they'll also be my heir, which comes with complications. Complications like people trying to kidnap them? Complications like needing to learn early that the world is dangerous, and power is the only reliable protection. Roman's hand covered hers on her stomach. But also complications like never wanting for anything, receiving the best education money can buy, and having a father who would burn the world down to keep them safe. Elena looked up at him. You're asking me to accept a life I never wanted. I'm asking you to stop running from a life you're already part of. Roman's other hand cupped her face. You can fight me, you can resent me, you can spend the next 6 months looking for escape routes. But at the end of it, you're still having my baby, and I'm still going to do everything in my power to protect both of you. The only question is whether you're going to let me do it the easy way or the hard way. What's the easy way? You stay. You let me take care of you. You ask questions instead of making assumptions. And when the baby comes, we figure out what kind of family we're going to be. And the hard way? Roman's smile was sharp. You fight every step, I control every detail, and we both end up miserable while the baby gets caught in the crossfire of our stubbornness. Elena wanted to pull away, to reject the entire premise, to insist she could still find a way out. But the truth was staring at her from Roman's eyes. She was out of options, out of time, and out of the energy it took to keep running. I don't trust you, she said quietly. Then we start there. Roman's thumb brushed her cheek. Trust is earned, not demanded. So I'll earn it. One day, one choice, one moment of honesty at a time. And if you can't, then you'll have spent 6 months in luxury while gestating a child who will inherit an empire, and you'll leave with enough money to never worry about security again. Roman's expression was unreadable. But I think you'll find that I'm considerably more trustworthy than you've given me credit for. He kissed her then, not asking permission, not giving her time to protest, just claiming her mouth with the same confidence he'd claimed everything else. Elena should have pushed him away, should have maintained boundaries, insisted on distance, protected what little autonomy she had left. Instead, she kissed him back. Because despite everything, the fear, the imprisonment, the complete loss of control, her body remembered his. Remembered how he'd touched her like she was precious and dangerous in equal measure. Remembered nights when the rest of the world had disappeared and all that existed was the space between them. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. This doesn't fix anything, Elena managed. No, Roman agreed, but it's a start. The kiss left Elena more unsettled than any threat could have. She retreated to her suite with Roman's taste still on her lips and her mind spinning with contradictions. How could she fear him and want him simultaneously? How could she resent the cage he'd built while feeling safer than she had in months? Sleep came in fragments, broken by dreams where she ran through endless hallways that all led back to Roman's arms. Morning brought another round of nausea, but this time Elena managed it with the medication Dr. Morrison had prescribed. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. No more losing her breakfast, no more shaking on bathroom floors, no more pretending strength she didn't possess. She hated that Roman had been right about needing help, but she couldn't deny the difference it made. Mrs. Chen appeared with breakfast, perfectly poached eggs, whole grain toast, fresh fruit arranged like art on expensive china. Elena ate at the small table by the windows, watching the city wake up beneath her, and tried to construct a plan that didn't exist. She was trapped, yes, but Roman had offered something unexpected last night. Honesty. Not comfort, not false promises, but the brutal truth about who he was and what her life would become. There was a strange kind of power in that clarity, even if it came wrapped in control. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Roman entered without waiting for permission, dressed for business in another tailored suit that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe had. He looked like he'd slept perfectly, no shadows under his eyes, no evidence of the tension that had crackled between them the night before. "We have a situation," he said without preamble. Elena set down her fork. "What kind of situation?" "The kind that requires you to understand exactly what world you're part of." Roman's expression was unreadable. "Get dressed. Something comfortable. We're going to my operations center." "Your what?" "The place where I actually run my business." He checked his watch. "You have 20 minutes." He left before she could protest. Elena stared at the closed door, her mind racing. Operations Center sounded ominous, like something from a crime thriller. But Roman's tone had been matter-of-fact, like he was inviting her to a routine office visit rather than into the heart of whatever empire he controlled. She dressed in the clothes Mrs. Chen had provided, dark jeans that actually fit her changing body, a soft sweater in charcoal gray, comfortable boots. When she emerged from the suite, Roman was waiting in the hallway with 2 men she'd never seen before. Both were built like walls, with the kind of watchful stillness that screamed security. Elena, this is Marcus and Tony. They'll be with us today. Roman's hand settled at her back, guiding her toward the elevator. Standard protocol. For what? For keeping you alive. He said it casually, like discussing the weather. The elevator descended past the lobby to a sub-level parking garage Elena hadn't known existed. Another black SUV waited, engine running, with a driver behind the wheel and a third security guard in the passenger seat. Roman handed her into the back, slid in beside her, and the vehicle was moving before she'd even fastened her seatbelt. Manhattan blurred past the tinted windows. Elena recognized the route vaguely, heading downtown toward the financial district. The SUV navigated traffic with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where they were going and didn't care about minor inconveniences like red lights or pedestrians. "You're scaring me," Elena said quietly. Roman glanced at her. "Good. You should understand what's at stake." "Which is what?" "Everything." He pulled out his phone, scrolled through messages with sharp efficiency. 3 months ago, while you were busy running, someone tried to rob one of my warehouses. They failed, but the attempt was sophisticated enough to suggest inside information. I've been investigating since then, pulling threads, following money. This morning, those threads led somewhere I didn't expect. Elena's stomach tightened. "Where?" "To a setup that almost got you killed." Roman's jaw clenched. "And to a person I'm going to deal with today." The SUV pulled into an underground garage beneath a building that looked abandoned from the outside. But once they descended below street level, everything changed. Security cameras, card readers, guards with visible weapons checking credentials. The vehicle passed through 2 checkpoints before stopping in front of a reinforced door. Roman exited, offering his hand to Elena. She took it because refusing felt pointless, and because part of her needed the anchor of his touch in this suddenly alien environment. They entered a corridor that could have belonged to any high-security facility. Concrete walls, fluorescent lighting, doors marked with numbers and codes she didn't understand. At the end of the corridor, double doors opened into a room that took Elena's breath away. It looked like a command center from a spy movie. Multiple screens covered one wall, showing feeds from what must have been dozens of locations. Desks with computers, people working with focused intensity, phones ringing with muted urgency. Maps covered another wall, the city broken down into territories, marked with pins and annotations that probably meant life or death to someone. A man in his 50s stood from one of the desks as they entered. Salt and pepper hair, expensive but understated suit, eyes that cataloged Elena in a single glance before returning to Roman. "She's here?" Roman asked. "Secured in room 3. Waiting exactly as long as you wanted her to wait." The man's voice carried the faint accent of someone who'd learned English as a second language decades ago. "Good." Roman turned to Elena. "This is Dmitri. He runs intelligence operations. Dmitri, this is Elena. She's to be protected at all costs and given access to anything I have access to." Dmitri's expression shifted minutely. Surprise, assessment, acceptance. "Understood." "Wait." Elena pulled her hand from Roman's. "What do you mean, access to anything you have access to?" "I mean exactly that." Roman faced her fully. "You wanted to understand my world? This is it. The command center where I coordinate legitimate and illegitimate operations. The place where decisions get made about money, territory, and occasionally who lives and dies. You're going to see all of it." "Why?" "Because you're carrying my air, which makes you a target." Roman's voice was harder now, all business. "Because you need to understand that the life I'm offering isn't just luxury penthouses and doctors on call. It's this, the machinery that keeps us safe, the violence that protects what matters, the reality you can't run from anymore." Elena felt dizzy. "I don't want to see this." "Too bad." Roman caught her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You made assumptions that almost got you killed. So now you're going to see the truth. And then you're going to decide if you can live with it, or if you'd rather spend the next 6 months fighting a war you can't win." He released her and turned to Dmitri. "Bring up the surveillance from the warehouse incident, all of it. I want her to see how close she came." Dmitri moved to one of the computers. The main screen shifted, showing grainy footage of what looked like a warehouse interior, timestamped from 3 months ago. 2 days before Elena had run. The footage showed men in masks entering through a side door, moving with military precision toward what looked like shipping containers. They were fast, efficient, clearly professionals. But they'd barely reached the containers when other men appeared. Roman security, Elena assumed, and gunfire erupted. Elena watched in horrified fascination as the scene devolved into chaos. The masked men retreated, leaving 2 of their own dead on the concrete floor. Roman's people secured the area, checked the containers, moved with the same precision but more familiarity with the terrain. "Standard robbery attempt," Dmitri said, his tone clinical. Except for one detail. The footage jumped to a different angle. One of the masked men had been captured, forced to his knees, mask removed. Elena couldn't see his face clearly, but she could see him talking, gesturing, clearly giving up information. "He confessed that they were hired to make the robbery look real," Dmitri continued. "But the actual target wasn't the warehouse contents." The screen shifted again, this time to what looked like security footage from outside the warehouse. A woman stood in the shadows across the street, watching. The camera zoomed in, and Elena's blood went cold. It was her, or someone who looked exactly like her. Same height, same build, same dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. The resemblance was uncanny. "That's not me," Elena whispered. "No," Roman agreed from behind her. "But it was meant to look like you. Someone hired a look-alike to be spotted near the warehouse during the robbery. Security footage would show what appeared to be you scouting the location. Combined with Marcus's attempts to gather information through you, it would have looked like you were the inside contact." Elena's legs went weak. Roman's hand steadied her, guiding her to a chair. "The plan was elegant," Roman continued, his voice cold with controlled fury. "Frame you as a traitor, present me with evidence that you'd been working with my enemies, and let my own people demand justice. I would have had no choice but to eliminate the threat. You would have killed me." Elena's voice was barely audible. "I would have been expected to. And if I'd hesitated, if I'd shown weakness by protecting someone who appeared to be a traitor, my own organization would have fractured." Roman crouched beside her chair, his eyes level with hers. "Someone knew that. Someone understood exactly how to manipulate the situation to force my hand." "Who?" "That's what we're going to find out." Roman stood, nodding to Dmitri. "Bring her in." 2 guards entered through a side door, escorting a woman in her early 30s. She was beautiful in a hard, polished way. Designer clothes that looked rumpled now. Dark hair that had probably been perfect hours ago, but was disheveled from what Elena assumed was time in custody. Her makeup was smudged, but her eyes were sharp and defiant. When she saw Roman, something flickered in her expression. Fear, yes, but also calculation. She was still looking for angles, still trying to find a way to control the situation. "Valentina," Roman said, his voice carrying enough ice to freeze the room. "Thank you for joining us." "I didn't have much choice, did I?" Her accent was Italian, her tone dripping with false bravado. "Your thugs dragged me out of a very important lunch." "Your lunch can wait. This can't." Roman gestured to one of the screens. "We've been following the money from the warehouse robbery. Very carefully laundered, very well hidden, but my people are exceptionally good at finding things people want to stay hidden." The screen showed what looked like financial records, transfers, account numbers, dates. Elena couldn't make sense of most of it, but she saw Valentina's expression tighten. "It led back to you," Roman continued, "to accounts you thought were buried deep enough that I'd never find them, to payments made to hire the robbery crew, to find and pay the look-alike, to orchestrate an entire operation designed to make me kill Elena." Valentina's eyes flickered to Elena for the first time, cataloging her with visible disdain. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me." Roman's voice dropped to something dangerous. "We have everything. Bank records, communications with the robbery crew, payments to Marcus Reed to get close to Elena in the first place. We have the look-alike in custody, and she's already confirmed you hired her. You're not getting out of this, Valentina. The only question is what I do with you now that I have proof." Valentina's composure finally cracked. "You were supposed to marry me. Our families agreed, Roman. You were supposed to take over the Rizzi territory through our alliance, and instead you threw it away for—" She gestured dismissively at Elena. "For her. Some nobody you picked up at a gallery opening." So you decided to eliminate the competition. Roman's tone was conversational, but Elena could hear the rage underneath. By framing her as a traitor and forcing me to kill her myself. Brilliant, really. I kill Elena. I'm devastated. I'm vulnerable. And you step in to console me. Eventually, we marry as planned. You get the power you wanted. And everyone's happy except for the innocent woman who'd be dead. She was in the way. Valentina lifted her chin. And she was weak. Look at her. She ran the moment she heard one phone call. She didn't deserve you. No, Roman agreed. She deserved honesty. She deserved protection. She deserved a partner who wouldn't manipulate her into a death sentence. He moved closer to Valentina, his body language pure threat. You, on the other hand, deserve exactly what's coming to you. Elena watched the exchange with growing horror. This woman, the stranger, had orchestrated an entire conspiracy to get her killed, had paid people, moved money, created an elaborate trap, all because she'd wanted Roman and saw Elena as an obstacle. What are you going to do? Valentina asked, and for the first time real fear crept into her voice. That depends. Roman glanced at Dmitri. Show her the rest. The screen shifted again, this time showing what looked like surveillance footage from multiple locations. Elena saw men being arrested, money being seized, buildings being raided. A systematic dismantling of something that must have been extensive. Your network, Roman explained to Valentina. Every contact you used to set this up, every person you paid, every piece of infrastructure you built while trying to undermine me. We've been taking it apart for the past week. Your people are in custody, your money is frozen, your connections are severed. Valentina's face went white. You can't. I already have. Roman's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. Your family is cutting you off as we speak. They received a very detailed presentation about your unauthorized operations and your attempt to start a war between my organization and theirs. They're not pleased. They won't believe. They already do. I made sure of it. Roman pulled out his phone, pulled up an email, showed it to Valentina. Elena couldn't see the contents, but she saw Valentina's expression collapse. You've destroyed me, Valentina whispered. No, you destroyed yourself. Roman pocketed the phone. I'm just making sure everyone knows it. He turned to the guards. Take her to holding. I'll decide what to do with her after I've discussed it with Elena. The guards moved to escort Valentina out, but she pulled away from their grip, her eyes locked on Elena with pure venom. You think you've won? Valentina spat. You think carrying his baby makes you special? You're nothing, a temporary distraction. He'll get bored, and when he does, there will be someone else ready to take your place. Roman moved before Elena could react, stepping between them with enough force that Valentina actually flinched. Touch her, threaten her, or even look at her wrong again, and I won't bother with exile, Roman said quietly. I'll bury you so deep your own family won't find the pieces. Do you understand me? Valentina's bravado crumbled completely. She nodded once, and the guards dragged her from the room. Silence fell over the command center. The other people working at their stations had stopped to watch the confrontation, but now they returned to their tasks with practiced disinterest. This was routine for them. Threats, violence, power plays. Just another day in Roman's empire. Elena sat frozen in her chair trying to process everything she'd just witnessed. The conspiracy, the manipulation, the casual way Roman had dismantled someone's entire life in retaliation. The woman who'd wanted her dead was now powerless, destroyed, facing consequences Elena couldn't even imagine. You're in shock, Roman observed, crouching beside her chair again. That woman tried to have me killed. Yes. She manipulated Marcus into getting close to me, hired someone to impersonate me, staged a robbery that would make it look like I was a traitor. Also, Elena couldn't finish the sentence. Also, I'd execute you and eliminate the obstacle to her ambitions. Roman's hand found hers, and it almost worked. If you hadn't run when you did, if you'd stayed even a few more days, the frame would have been complete. I would have been presented with evidence that looked irrefutable, and I would have been expected to act. Would you have? Elena met his eyes. If you'd believed I was a traitor, would you have killed me? Roman's expression was unreadable. I don't know. I want to say no, that I would have questioned the evidence, that I would have found the truth before doing something irreversible. But honestly, I don't know. The admission was somehow more terrifying than any threat. He could have killed her, would have been expected to kill her, and he genuinely didn't know if he would have resisted that expectation. "This is your world," Elena said quietly. "People trying to kill each other over power and territory. Conspiracies and frame-ups and casual violence. This is what our baby will be born into." Yes, Roman didn't try to soften it. This is reality. Messy, dangerous, and completely unforgiving of weakness or naivety. And you want me to accept this. I want you to understand it. Roman helped her to her feet. I want you to see that the protection I'm offering isn't just comfort, it's survival. Without me, you would have died 3 months ago. With me, you and the baby have a chance at something more than just staying alive. Elena pulled her hand from his, needing space to think. She walked to the wall of screens, watching feeds from locations she didn't recognize. Warehouses, clubs, restaurants, street corners. All of it monitored, controlled, managed like pieces on a chessboard. "What happens to Valentina?" she asked. "That's your decision." Elena turned. "What?" "She tried to have you killed. She manipulated people around you, used your own fears against you, and orchestrated a conspiracy that would have ended with your death." Roman's expression was serious. Traditional response would be to kill her and send her body back to her family as a message. But I'm giving you the choice. I don't want to decide if someone lives or dies. Then she lives. But she doesn't get to stay in New York, doesn't get to keep her resources or her connections, doesn't get to threaten you ever again. Roman moved closer. Exile, stripped of everything she built. A warning to anyone else who might think you're an acceptable target. Elena thought about the woman who'd looked at her with such contempt, who'd seen her as nothing more than an obstacle to be eliminated. Part of her wanted revenge, wanted to see Valentina suffer the way Elena had suffered for 3 months while running scared. But a larger part recoiled from the idea of having that kind of power over another person's fate. "Exile," Elena finally said. "But I want her to know that this was my choice. I want her to understand that I had the power to end her and chose mercy instead." Roman's expression shifted to something that might have been respect. "Dmitri, make the arrangements. Valentina Rizzi is exiled from the city, effective immediately. Accounts frozen, properties seized, connections severed. She gets 1 suitcase and a one-way ticket to wherever she wants to go that isn't here. And make sure she knows this was Elena's decision." Dmitri nodded, already pulling up information on one of the computers. Roman turned back to Elena. "That was the right choice." "Was it?" Elena felt exhausted. "I don't know what the right choice is anymore. A week ago I was serving eggs in a diner. Now I'm deciding the fate of women who tried to murder me. Nothing about this feels right." "Welcome to my world." Roman's hand settled on her shoulder. "It only gets more complicated from here." They left the command center with the same security detail that had brought them. The SUV navigated back through Manhattan traffic while Elena stared out the window, seeing the city differently now. Every building potentially contained one of Roman's operations. Every person on the street could be connected to the empire he controlled. The world she'd thought she understood was actually a facade over something darker and more complex. "You're quiet," Roman observed. "I'm thinking." "About?" "About whether I can do this." Elena turned to face him. "You showed me your world because you wanted me to understand what I'm part of. But what if understanding it just makes it worse? What if I can't live with knowing how you make your money, how you maintain your power, how many people you've—" She stopped. "How many people I've killed," Roman finished. "Say it, Elena. If we're going to do this, you need to be able to speak the truth out loud." "How many people you've killed?" The words felt heavy. "Fewer than you probably imagine, more than you'd be comfortable with." Roman's voice was steady. "I don't enjoy violence. I don't seek it out. But when it's necessary to protect what's mine or maintain the balance that keeps everyone safe, I don't hesitate." "How do you live with that?" "By understanding that the alternative is worse." Roman shifted to face her fully. "This city has territories, Elena. Criminal organizations that have existed for generations, with their own rules and their own justice. Without someone strong enough to enforce those rules, everything devolves into chaos. Civilians get hurt. Innocents become casualties. I maintain order through a combination of fear and respect, which occasionally requires making examples of people who threaten that order. So you're what? Some kind of necessary evil? I'm a man who does ugly things to prevent uglier outcomes. Roman's eyes were hard. I'm not asking you to approve. I'm asking you to accept reality and decide if you can live with it. Elena's hand moved to her stomach. I don't have much choice, do I? You always have choices. They just all come with consequences you might not like. Roman covered her hand with his. But understand this, whatever you decide about us, about me, about this life, the baby is protected. That's non-negotiable. You can hate me, resent me, refuse to be with me. But you can't take my child away from the protection I can provide. So I'm trapped either way. You're protected either way. Roman's voice softened slightly. There's a difference, even if you can't see it yet. The SUV pulled into the underground garage. They rode the elevator in silence, Elena processing everything she'd seen and heard. When they reached the penthouse, Mrs. Chen was waiting with lunch and concern evident on her usually neutral face. The doctor called, she said to Roman. He wants to schedule another appointment for next week. Set it up, Roman turned to Elena. You need to eat and rest. This morning was a lot. That's an understatement. Elena moved toward her suite, then stopped. Roman, what would have happened if I hadn't run? If I'd stayed and the frame had been completed? Roman was quiet for a long moment. I would have confronted you with the evidence. You would have denied it, and I would have had to decide whether to believe you or believe what looked like irrefutable proof. Someone would have died either way, either you for betrayal or whoever I blamed for trying to frame you. So my running actually saved lives. Your running saved your life. Roman's expression was unreadable. Whether it saved anyone else is debatable. Elena went to her room and closed the door, leaning against it as everything crashed down. She'd seen the machinery of Roman's empire, witnessed casual discussions of violence and power, made decisions about another person's fate. The woman she'd been 3 months ago, the one who'd served coffee and dreamed about maybe going back to school someday, felt like a stranger. But the woman she was becoming felt like a stranger too. She moved to the window, watching the city spread out below like a living map of territories and power. Somewhere out there, Valentina was being stripped of everything she'd built. Somewhere out there, people answered to Roman's commands without question. Somewhere out there, the baby growing inside Elena was already a piece on the chessboard of this dangerous world. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Roman entered without waiting, carrying a folder similar to the one Vincent had brought yesterday. New documents, he said, setting them on the table. Updated based on this morning's revelations. Elena picked up the folder, flipping through pages that outlined security protocols, threat assessments, and emergency procedures. It read like a manual for living under siege. This is excessive, she said. This is necessary. Roman moved to stand beside her. Valentina won't be the only person who sees you as a vulnerability or a target. The more visibly pregnant you become, the more obvious it is that you matter to me, the bigger the target on your back. So what? I just live in this penthouse, like a prisoner for the next 6 months. You live here like someone who understands the stakes. Roman's hand settled on her shoulder. You can go out, but with security. You can have visitors, but they'll be vetted. You can have a life, Elena, but it's a life with guardrails designed to keep you breathing. Elena set the folder down. And after the baby is born? We reassess, see what kind of family we want to be, figure out if you can live with loving a monster. Roman's voice carried an edge of something that might have been vulnerability. You're not a monster. No? Roman turned her to face him. I destroyed a woman's entire life this morning without breaking a sweat. I have people killed when they threaten my interests. I run an empire built on violence and fear. What part of that isn't monstrous? The part that's trying to protect me and our baby. Elena met his eyes. The part that gave me the choice about Valentina instead of just making the decision yourself. The part that's trying to earn my trust instead of just demanding it. Something shifted in Roman's expression. You're too forgiving. I'm trying to survive. Elena's hand covered his on her shoulder. And I'm starting to understand that surviving in your world means accepting things I never thought I'd have to accept. Roman pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. I'm going to keep you safe. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I'm going to make sure you and the baby survive this. I know. And Elena realized she believed it. Not because she trusted him completely, not because she'd forgiven everything, but because she'd seen enough to understand that Roman's protection was absolute. Brutal, controlling, and completely unwavering. She just had to decide if she could live with being the thing he was protecting. The weeks that followed developed a rhythm that felt both foreign and inevitable. Elena woke each morning to medication that kept the nausea at bay. Breakfast prepared by Mrs. Chen with meticulous attention to her nutritional needs, and the knowledge that she was living in a gilded cage where every door led back to Roman. But something had shifted after the confrontation with Valentina. Elena had seen the machinery of Roman's world, had made a choice that held real weight, had glimpsed the darkness he navigated daily. Understanding didn't equal acceptance, but it created space for something more complicated than simple fear. Roman kept his promise about earning trust. He answered questions she'd been too afraid to ask before, about his childhood in a world where violence was currency, about the grandfather who'd taught him that power without control was just chaos waiting to happen, about the choices that had led him to build an empire rather than destroy himself trying to escape one. The conversations happened in fragments, late at night when Elena couldn't sleep and found Roman in his office reviewing reports that probably detailed activities she was better off not knowing about. Dr. Morrison became a weekly presence, monitoring Elena's weight gain with satisfaction and the baby's development with professional enthusiasm. At 20 weeks, he performed an ultrasound that actually looked like a baby instead of abstract art, and asked if they wanted to know the sex. Elena looked at Roman, who'd been present for every appointment, always watching the monitor with an intensity that suggested he was memorizing every detail. "Do you want to know?" she asked. "Your choice," Roman said, but his eyes betrayed interest. "Boy," Dr. Morrison announced with a smile. "Healthy, active, measuring right on schedule." Roman's hand tightened on Elena's. A son. The word carried weight Elena hadn't anticipated. Not just a baby, but an heir. The future of whatever empire Roman had built. She watched emotions flicker across his face. Pride, fear, determination, something that looked almost like wonder. "Congratulations," Dr. Morrison said, packing up his equipment. "Everything looks excellent. I'll see you next week." When they were alone, Roman stood at the window of Elena's suite, staring out at the city with his hands in his pockets. The afternoon light caught the silver at his temples, making him look distinguished and dangerous in equal measure. "What are you thinking?" Elena asked from the bed where she still lay, the ultrasound gel being wiped from her stomach. "That I have 6 months to make sure the world my son enters is safer than the one I grew up in." Roman's voice was quiet. "That I need to eliminate threats I've been tolerating and shore up alliances I've been neglecting. That everything just became simultaneously more important and more complicated." Elena sat up, pulling her shirt down. "You're talking about your business." "I'm talking about his inheritance." Roman turned to face her. "My grandfather ruled through fear. My father tried to rule through compromise and got killed for his weakness. I've built something in between, respect backed by the credible threat of violence. But I don't know if that's enough for a world where my son will have a target on his back from birth." "He doesn't have to inherit any of this." Elena stood, moving closer. "You could walk away, build something legitimate, give him a normal life." Roman's laugh was bitter. "There is no walking away. Men like me don't retire to beach houses and die peacefully in our sleep. We get killed by the people we tried to leave behind, or by the people who want what we built. The only way out is death or irrelevance, and irrelevance is just slower death. So our son is trapped before he's even born. Our son is protected before he's even born." Roman closed the distance between them. "There's power in that, Elena. Resources, connections, safety that 99% of children will never have. Yes, it comes with danger, but the danger exists whether I acknowledge it or not. At least this way I can control some of it." Elena wanted to argue, to insist there had to be another way, but she'd seen enough of Roman's world to understand the futility. He was right. There was no clean exit, no simple solution. Their son would be born into complexity and danger, and the best they could do was make sure he survived it. "What happens when he's old enough to ask questions?" she asked quietly. "When he wants to know what his father does, why people are afraid of us, why he can't have the same freedom as other kids." We tell him the truth. Roman's hand settled on her waist, careful of her growing belly. We teach him that power is responsibility, that violence is a tool, not a solution, that he has choices even when it doesn't feel like it. We give him what I never had, parents who are both present and honest. The use of we instead of I sent something warm through Elena's chest. For the first time since Roman had found her in that diner, he was talking about them as a unit instead of as captor and captive. I'm still angry with you, she said, needing to establish that boundary. For finding me, for forcing me back here, for taking away my choices. I know. Roman's thumb traced circles on her hip through the soft fabric of her shirt. But you're less angry than you were. That doesn't make it right. No, but it makes it survivable. He leaned down, his forehead touching hers. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for partnership, for you to stop fighting me long enough to see that we might actually want the same things. Which are? Keeping our son safe, giving him opportunities we didn't have, building something that might actually last beyond one generation. Roman's voice softened. And maybe figuring out if what we had before you ran was real or just convenient. Elena's breath caught. They hadn't talked about their relationship before. Before the fear, before the running, before everything had imploded. Those 6 months when she genuinely believed she might be falling in love with a man who terrified and fascinated her in equal measure. I don't know if I can trust what I felt then, she admitted. I don't know what was real and what was me seeing what I wanted to see. Then we start over. Roman pulled back enough to meet her eyes. No assumptions, no history, just two people trying to raise a child together and figuring out the rest as we go. That simple? That complicated. His smile was slight. But we've survived worse. A knock on the door interrupted whatever Elena might have said. Roman stepped back, his expression shifting to business mode with practiced ease. Come in. Dmitri entered, his face grave. We have a situation. Brennan family is moving on the waterfront territories. 3 of our distribution points hit in the last hour. Roman's jaw tightened. Casualties? 2 injured, none dead. They were sending a message, not starting a war, yet. Dmitri's eyes flicked to Elena, then back to Roman. You need to respond. I know. Roman turned to Elena. I have to handle this. Handle it how? Elena asked, even though part of her didn't want to know. By reminding the Brennans why they don't move on my territory without consequences. Roman's voice was cold. Stay here. Security will be doubled. Don't leave the penthouse under any circumstances. For how long? Until I'm back and the situation is contained. Roman moved toward the door, then stopped. Elena, this is what I meant earlier. This is the reality. Someone always wants what you have, and the only way to keep it is to be willing to defend it with more force than they're willing to risk. He left with Dmitri, and Elena heard them talking in rapid, clipped sentences as they moved toward the elevator. Moments later, Mrs. Chen appeared with tea and sympathy evident on her usually neutral face. He'll be back, she said quietly, setting the tray down. He always is. Elena wanted to ask how many times Mrs. Chen had seen this, how many situations like this Roman had handled, how many people had been hurt or killed in the process of defending territory and maintaining power. But the answers would only confirm what she already knew. This was normal. This was life in Roman's world, violence as routine business, danger as acceptable risk. She spent the evening trying to distract herself with books she couldn't focus on, and television that felt too shallow for the thoughts churning in her head. Night fell over Manhattan, the city transforming into light and shadow, and Elena stood at the windows wondering where Roman was and what he was doing. Her phone buzzed with a text. Roman's number, short and direct. Situation contained. On my way back. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by shame at feeling relief that he'd survived whatever violence he'd been involved in. She was becoming complicit, she realized, not just accepting his world, but caring about his survival within it. The lines she'd tried to maintain were blurring with every day she spent in this penthouse, with every conversation that made him more human and less monster. Roman returned after midnight, his suit jacket gone, his white shirt stained with something dark that Elena tried not to identify. He looked exhausted and wired simultaneously, the combination of adrenaline and aftermath evident in every line of his body. "Are you hurt?" Elena asked from where she'd been curled on the couch, unable to sleep until she knew he was safe. "No." Roman moved to the bar, poured 2 fingers of whiskey, downed it in one swallow. "The Brennans lost 4 men. We lost none. Message received and acknowledged. You killed 4 people tonight. I didn't personally pull any triggers, but yes, 4 people died because they made the mistake of thinking I wouldn't retaliate." Roman poured another drink but didn't consume it, just held the glass like an anchor. "This is what you signed up for, Elena. This is what protecting our son looks like." Elena stood, crossing to where he stood, radiating tension and violence barely contained. She should have been repulsed, should have retreated to her room and locked the door against the reality of what he was. Instead, she reached for the glass he held and set it down. "Go shower," she said quietly. "Wash it off. Then come talk to me like a human being instead of a crime boss justifying bloodshed." Something shifted in Roman's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or appreciation. He nodded once and disappeared toward his bedroom. Elena heard water running, imagined blood and guilt washing down expensive drains, and wondered when she'd stopped seeing the violence as disqualifying and started seeing it as just another facet of the man she was choosing to build a life with. When Roman emerged 20 minutes later, he was clean, dressed in sleep pants and a t-shirt, looking more vulnerable than Elena had ever seen him. He found her still in the living room, and without a word sat beside her on the couch. "Talk to me," Elena said. "About what?" "About what it costs you. Not the money or the risk, but what it does to you personally to live this way." She turned to face him fully. "Because I can see it wearing on you, even if you try to hide it." Roman was quiet for a long moment. "My grandfather used to say that every man you kill takes a piece of your soul. Not in some mystical sense, but practically. You lose a little bit of your humanity with every life you end. I used to think he was being dramatic. Now I understand he was being honest." "How many pieces have you lost?" "Too many to count, not enough to stop functioning." Roman's hand found hers. "I don't enjoy this, Elena. I don't get off on the power or the violence, but I'm very good at it, and walking away would create a vacuum that would hurt more people than staying ever could." "So you're trapped too?" "We're all trapped by our choices." Roman's thumb traced patterns on her palm. "But some traps are more comfortable than others." Elena leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. He'd killed tonight, or ordered killings, which was the same thing morally. He'd defended territory with lethal force and would do it again without hesitation. And she was choosing to sit here with him, to offer comfort, to accept that this was who he was. "I'm not going to be your conscience," she said quietly. "I can't police your choices or judge you for doing what you think is necessary." "I know. But I need you to understand that our son is going to ask questions someday. Hard questions about what his father does and why. And we're going to have to answer them honestly." "Agreed." Roman shifted so he could see her face. "What else?" "I need you to promise that you'll try to build something legitimate for him, not to replace what you do, but to give him options you didn't have, so that when he's old enough to choose, he actually has a choice." Roman considered this. "I can do that. Vincent has been suggesting I expand into legitimate real estate and investment for years. I've avoided it because it felt like diluting focus, but for our son, I'll build him an empire he can run from a boardroom instead of a command center. And I need you to stop trying to control every aspect of my life." Elena pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "I understand the security, I accept the restrictions, but I need some autonomy. Some space to make my own choices, even if they're small ones." "Like what?" "Like being able to leave the penthouse occasionally. With security, fine, but leave. Go to galleries, bookstores, parks. Live something resembling a normal life instead of being a prisoner in luxury." Elena's voice was firm. "I'm not asking for freedom to run. I'm asking for freedom to breathe." Roman was silent, weighing the request against his need for control. "Supervised outings. Security detail that doesn't leave your side. No locations that haven't been vetted in advance. And you carry a panic button at all times." "Deal." Elena offered her hand to shake. Roman took it, but didn't shake, just held it. "You're negotiating with me now, like a partner instead of a captive." I'm trying to figure out how to live in this world without losing myself completely. Elena's other hand moved to her stomach, where their son was currently using her bladder as a punching bag. And I'm realizing that I can't do that by fighting you every step of the way. So what changed? Elena thought about the question. What had changed between the terrified woman Roman had found in a Brooklyn diner and the one sitting here negotiating terms after he'd killed 4 people? The answer was complicated and uncomfortable and absolutely true. I stopped seeing you as the villain of my story and started seeing you as a complicated man doing terrible things for reasons he actually believes in. She met his eyes. I don't agree with everything you do. I don't think I ever will. But I understand now that you're not evil, you're just ruthless. And there's a difference. Is there? Roman's voice was rough. I'm not sure I see one most days. Evil enjoys the harm. Ruthless accepts it as necessary. Elena squeezed his hand. You came back tonight looking haunted, not triumphant. That's the difference. Roman pulled her closer, tucking her against his side with unexpected gentleness. You're too forgiving. I'm trying to survive, and I've learned that surviving in your world means accepting things I never thought I'd accept. Elena echoed her own words from weeks ago, but this time they carried different weight. Not resignation, but choice. I'm choosing this, Roman. Not because I'm trapped, or because I have no options, but because I genuinely believe you'll protect our son better than anyone else could, even if the cost of that protection is living with a man who kills without hesitation when he thinks it's necessary. I'll try to be better than what I am. Don't. Elena looked up at him. Don't try to be something you're not. Just be honest with me. Keep us safe, and build something our son can choose to be part of, or walk away from when he's old enough. That's all I'm asking. Roman kissed her then, soft and searching, not claiming, but asking. Elena kissed back, tasting whiskey and regret, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. When they broke apart, Roman rested his forehead against hers. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve this, he said quietly. Good. Elena smiled slightly. Because I'm going to spend the rest of mine holding you to impossible standards and refusing to let you off the hook when you fail. That's fair. They sat like that for a long time, wrapped around each other while the city glittered outside and their sun kicked against Elena's ribs. It wasn't love. Not yet. Trust was still fragile, and forgiveness hadn't fully taken root, but it was partnership, built on brutal honesty and acceptance of realities neither of them could change. Eventually, Roman stood, offering his hand. Come to bed. Not to mine, he added quickly when Elena hesitated. Just sleep in the same room. I want to know you're close after tonight. Elena took his hand and let him guide her to his bedroom. The space was masculine and elegant, dominated by a massive bed with dark linens and windows that offered an even more spectacular view than her suite. Roman pulled back the covers, waited until Elena had settled, then climbed in beside her. He didn't reach for her, didn't push for more than proximity. Just lay there in the darkness, close enough that Elena could feel his warmth, far enough that she didn't feel crowded. Roman? She said into the quiet. Yeah? Thank you for coming back. His hand found hers under the covers. I'll always come back. That's the one promise I can make and keep without qualification. Elena believed him, and that belief, more than anything else that had happened since he'd walked into that diner, felt like the beginning of something that might actually last. Sleep came easier with Roman beside her than it had in the months she'd spent alone, and that realization was both comforting and terrifying in equal measure. The next morning, Elena woke to find Roman already dressed and on the phone, speaking rapid Italian to someone who sounded agitated. She watched from the bed as he paced, his free hand gesturing sharply, his tone brooking no argument. Whatever had happened overnight, it required his immediate attention. He ended the call and turned to find her awake. I need to go handle something. Security will be here within the hour. Mrs. Chen has breakfast ready. Is this about last night? Fallout. Roman moved to the bed, leaned down to kiss her forehead. The Brennans want to negotiate terms. I'm going to make sure those terms are very clear about what happens if they test me again. Be careful. Something softened in his expression. You're worried about me. Our son needs his father. Elena kept her voice neutral, even though the truth was more complicated. She was worried, and not just for practical reasons. Somewhere along the way, she'd started caring whether Roman survived his dangerous world. "I'll be back for dinner." He straightened all business again. "Vincent is coming by this afternoon with more paperwork, medical directives, trust modifications based on knowing we're having a son. Sign what you're comfortable with, leave the rest for discussion." "Okay?" Roman paused at the door. "Elena, thank you for last night, for understanding, for not running, for choosing this." I haven't chosen everything yet," she cautioned. "I'm still figuring out what this is and what I can live with." "That's fair." He smiled slightly. "But you're here, and that's more than I had a month ago." He left, and Elena lay in his bed, surrounded by his scent and the lingering warmth of his body, and wondered when the penthouse had started feeling less like a prison and more like a home she was actively choosing to stay in. The answer was uncomfortable but true. It had happened gradually, in conversations and compromises, in moments of brutal honesty and unexpected tenderness. She was building a life here, with a man who was equal parts protector and predator, and the most terrifying part was that she was doing it willingly. Elena placed her hand on her stomach, feeling the flutter of movement that was becoming more pronounced every day. Their son, the future Roman was already planning for, the heir she'd never intended to give him. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to the life growing inside her. Complicated and sometimes scary, but okay. And for the first time since Roman had walked into that diner, she actually believed it. The months that followed transformed the penthouse in ways Elena hadn't anticipated. The guest suite she'd been assigned became less of a refuge and more of a storage space for maternity clothes and baby books. She accumulated during supervised outings with security. Most nights, she ended up in Roman's bed, not always because of physical intimacy, though that had gradually returned as her body changed and adapted, but because sleeping alone had started to feel wrong after so many conversations that stretched into the early hours. The nursery took shape in a room adjacent to Roman's bedroom. Elena had expected him to hire decorators and simply present her with a finished product, but instead he'd asked her opinion on everything from wall colors to furniture styles. They'd argued about cribs. Elena wanted something simple and safe. Roman wanted something that looked like it belonged in a palace, and eventually compromised on something elegant but functional. The room filled with stuffed animals from Mrs. Chen, books from Vincent, who apparently had strong opinions about early childhood literacy, and a rocking chair that Roman had custom-made to fit Elena's height perfectly. At 32 weeks, Elena's body had transformed into something she barely recognized. Her belly was round and prominent, her back ached constantly, and sleep came in fragments between bathroom trips and the baby's increasingly aggressive movements. Doctor Morrison assured her everything was progressing normally, but normal felt like an understatement for the way her son seemed determined to practice martial arts against her internal organs. Roman had become unexpectedly attentive to the physical realities of late pregnancy. He'd researched everything, doctor. Morrison mentioned, ordered a pregnancy pillow that took up half the bed, and started giving her foot rubs in the evenings while they watched television or discussed the legitimate business ventures he was building for their son's future. The man who'd walked into that diner 6 months ago with lethal purpose had developed a gentleness Elena hadn't known he possessed. But the danger hadn't disappeared just because they were building something that resembled a family. If anything, it had intensified. Roman's competitors had noticed his visible vulnerability. The pregnant woman who appeared occasionally on supervised outings, always surrounded by security, but still present enough to become a target. Twice in the past month, threats had been intercepted before they materialized into actual danger. Roman had dealt with both situations with his characteristic ruthless efficiency, and Elena had learned not to ask for details she didn't need to carry. On a cold February evening, Elena stood in the nursery arranging tiny clothes that still didn't feel real. In 6 weeks, give or take, there would be an actual baby wearing these impossibly small outfits. A son who would look at her and Roman and see parents instead of a crime boss and the woman he'd trapped. The responsibility felt overwhelming. Roman found her there, leaning against the doorframe with exhaustion evident despite the expensive suit he still wore from whatever meetings had consumed his day. "You're supposed to be resting," he said without heat. "I can't rest. Every position is uncomfortable, and every time I lie down, he decides it's time for gymnastics." Elena held up a onesie covered in cartoon elephants. Your son is already as stubborn as his father. My son? Roman moved into the room, taking the onesie and examining it with an expression that was almost tender. Pretty sure you contributed to his genetic makeup. I'm blaming you for the stubbornness, and the constant kicking, and the fact that he's apparently using my ribs as a xylophone. Roman's hand settled on her belly, and as if on cue, a strong kick landed directly against his palm. His expression shifted to something Elena had seen more frequently lately: wonder mixed with fear, love tangled with the weight of responsibility. He's strong, Roman said quietly. He's relentless. Elena covered Roman's hand with hers. Like someone else I know. They stood like that for a moment, connected by the life between them and the complicated web of choices that had led to this room, this moment, this unexpected family. I have something for you, Roman said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. Vincent finalized the documents today. Elena took the envelope, recognizing the law firm's letterhead. Inside were papers she'd been expecting: official recognition of their son's paternity, inheritance structures, medical directives. But there was also something unexpected: property deeds in her name, investment accounts with balances that made her dizzy, and legal documents that gave her actual ownership of assets rather than just access. What is this? She asked. Security that doesn't depend on me being alive or us being together. Roman's voice was matter of fact. You've been living here for 6 months accepting my protection and my control. These give you the power to leave if you decide you need to, and to take our son somewhere safe if anything happens to me. Elena stared at the documents, understanding the magnitude of what he was offering. Real freedom, backed by resources that would let her build a life anywhere in the world. The cage he'd constructed had just opened, and he was trusting her not to run. Why now? She asked. Because in 6 weeks you're going to be even more vulnerable than you are now. Because I need to know that if the worst happens during delivery or in the chaos afterward, you and our son have options. Roman met her eyes. And because I'm choosing to trust you the way you've been choosing to trust me. Elena set the documents on the changing table and turned to face him fully. I'm not going to run. I know, but I needed you to know you could if you had to. Roman's hand cupped her face. I trapped you once because I was terrified of losing what I'd barely realized I had. I'm not making that mistake again. The admission cost him something. Elena could see it in the tension around his eyes, the careful control of his expression. Roman DeLuca didn't do vulnerable, didn't show weakness, didn't trust easily. But he was doing all three right now, in this nursery they'd built together, with their son kicking between them. Elena kissed him, tasting the fear and trust and stubborn hope he was offering. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. We're going to be okay, she said. All three of us. Promise me something, Roman said. What? If something happens to me, you don't try to shield him from the truth about who I was. You tell him everything, the good, the bad, the complicated. You let him decide for himself whether his father was a monster or just a man doing monstrous things for reasons he believed in. Nothing's going to happen to you. Elena. His voice was firm. Promise me. I promise. She pulled back to meet his eyes. But you're going to be around to tell him yourself, so this is hypothetical. Humor me. I'll tell him the truth. That his father was ruthless and protective and flawed and trying. That he built an empire through violence, but also built legitimate businesses so his son would have choices. That he loved us enough to give me the power to leave. Elena's hand covered his on her belly. I'll tell him everything, and I'll let him make his own decisions about what it means. Roman nodded, satisfied. They stood together in the soft light of the nursery, and Elena felt something settle in her chest. Not certainty, there was too much danger and too many variables for certainty, but peace with the choices she'd made and the life she was actively building. The peace lasted exactly 3 days. Elena woke at 2 a.m. to wetness and a sharp pain that made her gasp. For a confused moment, she thought she'd simply lost control of her bladder. Pregnancy had made that embarrassingly common. But the pain came again, radiating from her lower back around to her abdomen with enough force to make her cry out. Roman was awake instantly, sitting up and reaching for her. What's wrong? I think... Another contraction cut off her words. Something's wrong. It's too early. Roman was already moving, hitting the intercom button that connected to his security team. "Get Dr. Morrison here now, and prepare the car." He turned back to Elena, his hands gentle despite the urgency in his voice. "How far apart are the contractions?" "I don't know. This is only the second—" She gasped as another one hit, barely a minute after the last. "Roman, this isn't normal. It's too fast, too early." "I know." He helped her stand, supporting her weight as another contraction made her knees weak. "We're going to the hospital, now." The next 30 minutes were a blur of activity. Mrs. Chen appeared with the hospital bag Elena had packed weeks ago. Security swarmed, clearing paths and preparing vehicles. Dr. Morrison arrived, took one look at Elena's face, and confirmed what she already knew. "You're in active labor. We need to move." The SUV ride to the hospital was the longest 20 minutes of Elena's life. Contractions came hard and fast, too close together for someone who wasn't supposed to be in labor for another 6 weeks. "Doctor." Morrison sat beside her, monitoring her vitals with professional calm that didn't quite hide his concern. Roman held her hand tight enough to hurt, his other hand on his phone coordinating security for the hospital and barking orders to people Elena couldn't track. The hospital had been prepared. Private floor, security already in place, medical team waiting. Elena was transferred to a wheelchair and rushed to a delivery suite that looked more like a luxury hotel room than a medical facility. Nurses descended, hooking her up to monitors, checking her dilation, asking questions she could barely focus on between contractions. 7 centimeters, one of the nurses announced. "She's progressing fast." Dr. Morrison appeared beside her. "Elena, listen to me. The baby's coming tonight, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. He's a little early, but 34 weeks is viable. We have a NICU team standing by just in case, but I need you to focus on breathing through the contractions. Can you do that?" Elena nodded, though panic was making it hard to breathe at all. Too early. 6 weeks too early. What if something was wrong? What if their son wasn't ready? Roman's face appeared in her field of vision, blocking out the medical team and the monitors and everything except his eyes. "Look at me," he commanded. "Just me. Breathe with me." He demonstrated exaggerated breaths that Elena tried to match. In and out, while her body did things she couldn't control and fear threatened to swallow her whole. "You've survived everything else," Roman said quietly, just for her. "You survived running, survived coming back, survived learning to live in my world. You can survive this." "I'm scared." "I know, so am I." The admission seemed to cost him. "But we're doing this together." The hours that followed blurred into an endless cycle of pain and breathing and Roman's voice cutting through the chaos. Nurses came and went, Dr. Morrison gave instructions, monitors beeped with information Elena couldn't process. At some point, she was given an epidural that took the edge off but didn't eliminate the relentless pressure of her body preparing to push a human being into the world. At 6 in the morning, Dr. Morrison checked her again and nodded. "It's time. You're fully dilated. When the next contraction comes, I need you to push." Elena looked at Roman, who'd been beside her through all of it, who looked exhausted and terrified and determined in equal measure. "I can't do this," she whispered. "Yes, you can." Roman's hand tightened on hers. "You're the strongest person I know. You can absolutely do this." The contraction came, and Elena pushed with everything she had. Once, twice, 3 times until Dr. Morrison told her to stop and breathe. Then again, and again, and again, until time lost meaning, and all that existed was the effort of bringing life into a dangerous world. "I can see his head," Dr. Morrison announced. "One more push should do it." Elena gathered what felt like the last of her strength and pushed with every ounce of determination she possessed. The pressure released suddenly, and then the room filled with a sound that made her heart stop and restart. A baby crying. Their son, loud and indignant and alive. "He's here," Dr. Morrison said, holding up a tiny, red-faced human being who was definitely smaller than Elena had imagined, but seemed furious about being evicted from his comfortable home. "Congratulations." The baby was placed on Elena's chest, still connected by the umbilical cord, still covered in vernix and blood, and all the messy reality of birth. He was perfect. Impossibly small, with dark hair and Roman's nose and lungs that clearly worked just fine based on the volume of his protests. Elena looked at Roman, who stood frozen beside the bed. staring at their son like he had never seen anything more terrifying or miraculous. "Do you want to cut the cord?" Dr. Morrison offered. Roman nodded mutely, accepting the surgical scissors with shaking hands. He cut where directed, severing the physical connection between Elena and their son, creating a separate human being who would never be fully theirs to control or protect. The baby was taken briefly to be weighed and measured and checked by the NICU team that had been standing by. 5 pounds, 2 ounces, 17 inches long. A little small, but perfectly healthy for 34 weeks. No breathing problems, no complications, just a baby who decided he was ready to meet the world ahead of schedule. When their son was returned to Elena, cleaned and wrapped in a soft blanket, Roman finally moved. He sat on the edge of the bed, reaching out with one finger to touch the impossibly tiny hand that immediately gripped it with surprising strength. "He's so small," Roman said, his voice rough with emotion Elena had never heard from him. "He's perfect," Elena corrected, exhausted and overwhelmed and more in love than she'd ever imagined possible. They sat like that while the medical team finished their work, and nurses came and went with instructions about feeding and sleeping and what to watch for. Eventually, they were left alone in the private suite, just the three of them in the early morning light. Roman stood from the bed and moved to the windows, looking out over the city with his hands in his pockets. Elena watched him, recognizing the posture she'd seen dozens of times when he was processing something he couldn't quite articulate. "What are you thinking?" she asked quietly, careful not to wake the baby who'd finally settled against her chest. "That I have absolutely no idea how to be a father to someone who depends on me for everything." Roman didn't turn around. "I can run an empire. I can make decisions that affect hundreds of people. I can negotiate treaties and plan operations. But I have no idea how to keep that tiny human alive, much less raise him to be something better than what I am." "You're not doing it alone," Elena said, "and you're going to make mistakes, but so am I. We'll figure it out together." Roman finally turned to face her. "What if I'm too much like my grandfather? Too comfortable with violence, too used to controlling everything, too damaged to teach him anything worth knowing? Then I'll balance you out." Elena smiled slightly. "And he'll learn from both of us. Your strength and my compassion, your ruthlessness and my empathy, your world and my dreams about what his could be instead." "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple, it's terrifying." Elena looked down at their son, who was making small snuffling sounds against her chest. "But I spent 3 months running from you because I was terrified, and all it did was waste time we can't get back. I'm done running from fear. I'm choosing to believe that we can do this even when it feels impossible." Roman crossed to the bed and sat beside her again, his arm going around her shoulders while his free hand stroked their son's soft hair. "We need to name him," he said quietly. They discussed names for weeks without settling on anything that felt right. Elena had vetoed anything too pretentious. Roman had vetoed anything he considered weak. They'd narrowed it to a short list but hadn't committed to anything final. "What about Alexander?" Elena suggested. "Strong, classic, with enough history that he can make it his own." "Alexander DeLuca." Roman tested the name, considering. "Alexander James DeLuca, after your father." Elena's breath caught. She'd mentioned her father once, months ago, the man who died when she was 12, leaving her and her mother struggling. Roman had remembered, had filed it away, and brought it back now as an offering. "Yes," she whispered. Alexander James DeLuca. Their son, Alexander, no longer just an abstract concept but a real person with a name and a face, stirred against Elena's chest. His eyes opened briefly, unfocused but already searching, before closing again in the exhausted sleep of someone who'd had a very long day. The door opened quietly, and Mrs. Chen appeared with a tray of food and tea. She took one look at the baby and smiled with genuine warmth. "He's beautiful," she said simply, setting the tray down. "And he has his father's stubbornness already, coming early like that." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen." Roman stood, intercepting her before she could leave. "For everything these past months, for taking care of Elena when I couldn't, for preparing the nursery, for making the penthouse feel like a home instead of just a place to live." Mrs. Chen's expression softened. "That's my job, Mr. DeLuca, but it's been my pleasure." She glanced at Elena and the baby. "You've both needed taking care of, even if you're too stubborn to admit it." She left with her characteristic discretion, and Roman returned to the bed. Elena ate what she could manage while Roman held Alexander with the careful concentration of someone handling explosives. The baby seemed impossibly small in his father's arms, fragile and perfect and completely dependent. "I'm going to burn the world down to keep him safe," Roman said quietly, staring at his son's sleeping face. "I know." Elena set down her tea. "But you're also going to teach him that the world is worth protecting, not just conquering. That power is responsibility, not just control. That he has choices, even when it doesn't feel like it." "How did you get so wise?" 6 months of surviving your world and learning that strength comes in different forms. Elena reached out to stroke Alexander's cheek. "I'm not the same woman who ran from you in terror. I'm someone who understands that complicated doesn't mean wrong, and dangerous doesn't mean worthless." Roman looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I love you. I should have said it months ago, should have been brave enough to name what this was before you ran. But I'm saying it now. I love you, Elena. Not because you're carrying my son, because Alexander is already here, but because you've made me want to be better than what I am." Elena felt tears slip down her face. "I love you too. Even though you're ruthless and controlling and occasionally terrifying. Even though your world is dangerous and your choices are sometimes horrifying. I love the man who gives me foot rubs and builds nurseries and holds our son like he's made of glass." "We're a disaster," Roman said, but he was smiling. "We're a family," Elena corrected. "A complicated, unconventional, occasionally dangerous family, but a family." Alexander chose that moment to wake up and demand attention with the same imperious cry he'd announced his arrival with. Roman handed him back to Elena with visible relief, and she settled him against her chest to feed while Roman watched with fascination. The next few days passed in a blur of feeding schedules and diaper changes and visitors who came bearing gifts and carefully worded congratulations. Vincent arrived with legal documents establishing Alexander's place in the empire and trust funds that would ensure he never wanted for anything. Dmitri came with a surprisingly thoughtful gift, a first-edition children's book, and a promise that the security around Alexander would be absolute. Even some of Roman's business associates appeared, paying respects to the heir while carefully avoiding any discussion of the operations that funded the empire Alexander had been born into. Dr. Morrison cleared them to go home after 3 days, satisfied that both Elena and Alexander were healthy despite the early delivery. The ride back to the penthouse felt surreal, Elena cradling Alexander in the car seat that had been professionally installed, Roman beside her radiating protective tension, security following in 2 additional vehicles. The penthouse had been transformed in their absence. The nursery was fully stocked with everything they might need. A night nurse had been hired to help during the first few weeks, and Mrs. Chen had prepared meals that could be easily reheated when Elena had time to eat between feedings. That first night home, Elena sat in the rocking chair at 3 in the morning, feeding Alexander while Roman slept in exhausted fragments nearby. She studied her son's face. Roman's nose, her eyes, a perfect combination of them both, and felt the weight of responsibility settle fully on her shoulders. This tiny human would grow up in a world where his father was feared and respected in equal measure. He would learn early that power came with consequences, that safety required vigilance, that love and danger could exist in the same space. But he would also learn that his father had tried to build him options, that his mother had chosen to stay and fight for their family, that complicated didn't mean broken. Roman appeared in the doorway, drawn by some instinct even in sleep. He watched them for a moment before crossing to crouch beside the rocking chair. "Can't sleep?" Elena asked quietly. "Keep waking up to make sure you're both real." Roman's hand settled on Alexander's head, gentle and possessive. "That this isn't just another dream where I lose you both before I wake up. We're real. We're here. And we're not going anywhere." Elena shifted Alexander to her shoulder for burping. "We're building something together, Roman. It's messy and complicated and sometimes scary, but it's ours." "Ours," Roman repeated, like testing the word. "I spent so many years building an empire alone, making decisions that only affected me, living with consequences I could manage. And now everything I do affects both of you. Every choice, every risk, every enemy I make. It all comes back to keeping you safe. So we'll be careful. We'll be smart. and will raise Alexander to understand the world he's part of while also showing him what it could be. Elena met his eyes. He doesn't have to be trapped by your past or mine. He gets to write his own future, with us guiding him. With us guiding him, Elena confirmed. Together, Alexander burped impressively, making them both laugh quietly. Roman took him, settling him against his shoulder with increasing confidence. The sight of this dangerous man cradling their tiny son with such tenderness made Elena's heart ache in the best way. I never thought I'd have this, Roman admitted. Family, partnership, someone who knew exactly what I was and chose to stay anyway. I thought I'd build an empire and die alone, probably violently, with nothing to show for it except territory and fear. Instead, you have a son who's going to keep you up all night and a partner who refuses to let you make all the decisions. Elena stood, pressing a kiss to Roman's cheek. Lucky you. Luckiest man alive, Roman agreed, his free arm pulling her close. Despite everything, despite all the mistakes and the fear and the complications, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. They stood like that in the soft glow of the nursery nightlight. Three people who'd found each other through fear and desperation and had somehow built something that looked like hope. Outside the windows, Manhattan glittered with possibility and danger in equal measure. The world was still complicated, still dangerous, still full of threats they would have to navigate. But inside this room, in this moment, they were safe. They were together. They were family. And that, Elena realized, was enough. The weeks turned into months. Alexander grew stronger, more alert, developing a personality that was equal parts demanding and charming. He had Roman's intensity and Elena's stubbornness, a combination that promised interesting teenage years ahead. The night nurse eventually became unnecessary as Elena and Roman learned to tag team the exhausting reality of infant care, taking shifts and supporting each other through the sleepless chaos. Roman kept his promise about building legitimate businesses. He expanded into real estate development, invested in technology startups, created a portfolio of legal enterprises that would give Alexander options when he was old enough to choose. The criminal empire didn't disappear. Roman was too entrenched, too necessary to the delicate balance of power, but it became just one part of a larger legacy rather than the entirety of it. Elena established boundaries and kept them. She took Alexander on outings with security that was thorough but not suffocating. She reconnected with a few old friends who were carefully vetted but genuinely welcomed into her new life. She created space for herself that didn't depend on Roman's permission or approval, proving daily that partnership didn't require surrender. They fought, of course. About security measures, Elena thought were excessive. About business decisions Roman made without consulting her. About how much Alexander should know about his father's world and when. But they fought as partners who trusted each other to eventually reach compromise, not as captor and captive dancing around irreconcilable differences. On Alexander's first birthday, they gathered in the penthouse with the small circle of people who'd become family. Mrs. Chen had prepared a feast. Vincent brought gifts that were both thoughtful and practical. Dmitri appeared with a security assessment disguised as a photo album of Alexander's first year. Even Dr. Morrison stopped by, pleased to see his smallest patient thriving. Roman stood by the windows holding Alexander, who was determined to grab his father's expensive watch and put it in his mouth. Elena watched them from across the room, struck by how far they'd all come from that morning in a Brooklyn diner when her world had imploded and rebuilt simultaneously. Happy? Roman asked, catching her watching. Surprisingly, yes, Elena admitted, moving to join them. Complicated and occasionally terrifying, but happy. That's us, Roman agreed. Complicated, terrifying, and somehow making it work. Alexander chose that moment to succeed in his quest for the watch, shoving it triumphantly into his mouth. Roman rescued it with practiced ease while Elena laughed at her son's indignant protests. This was their life now, built on brutal honesty and hard-won trust, protected by security and strength, complicated by a world that would never be simple or safe. But it was theirs, chosen, fought for, and carefully constructed from the wreckage of fear and misunderstanding. Elena had stopped running. Roman had stopped demanding unconditional surrender, and together they were building something that might actually last. The city spread out below them, full of danger and possibility, belonging to a man who'd learned that power meant nothing without someone to share it with. And in the penthouse above it all, Three people who'd found each other against impossible odds celebrated the simple, extraordinary miracle of surviving long enough to become a family. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was real, and it was theirs, and that was more than enough.